Well, fancy seeing you here. Welcome to the eye tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about how I approach drawing eyes. Let's get started with part 1, drawing eyes. First, let's go over some simple eyeball anatomy. Don't worry, these are just going to be general shapes that I like to keep in mind when drawing and painting the eye, not like a hyper detailed anatomy memorization lesson for the eyeball. First, we have the eyeball, which is a sphere, and in front of the eyeball is the iris, which is the colored part of the eye. The iris actually dips in towards the eyeball, like an indent in the eyeball almost. I like to think of its shape kind of like a shallow bowl. This is going to be very important for knowing where to place the pupil. And then also some shading and color stuff, which we'll get into in the next tutorial. So in the center of the iris is the pupil. The pupil rests at the center / like the lowest part of that shallow bowl. And the pupil can change sizes depending on how much light there is, the character emotions, and drugs. For the emotions part, when we see something we like, the pupil tends to go wider. So if the character is happy or in love or is about to eat something delicious, the pupil might go wider. And if the character is experiencing more negative emotions or they see something they don't like, the pupil might be smaller. But how wide you draw the pupils can also kind of be a style thing. I personally tend to enjoy drawing pretty small pupils because I like how intense it makes the gaze look. Next, there is the cornea, which is the clear lens, although technically it's not the lens of the eye anatomically, just to be clear, but it's like the clear bulge that covers the iris. It does not fit perfectly onto the sphere shape of the eyeball. Instead, it bulges out a little bit just to cover that the iris and pupil part. The important thing to know about this part of the eye is even though it is clear, this is the layer of the eye where the eye shine and the reflections will sit on top of. The reflections don't reflect inside the bowl of the iris. They reflect on the bulge of the cornea. Let's do a quick little drawing from the front of the eyeball with eyelids. The scale might not be exactly correct for this drawing, especially since I tend to stylize, but it gives a sense of what's underneath for the structure. So 3 circles within each other, the eyeball, the iris, and then the pupil. Then the upper eyelid curves across the eyeball. Something to keep in mind is that in humans, unless we are really startled or afraid, it is pretty uncommon to see the whole iris. Usually the iris floats up a little bit under the upper eyelid. At the edge of the eyeball, I draw a soft little triangle shape for the corner of the eye and then curve the bottom lid. Now, something I noticed here is that in more realistic eyes, the bottom of the lid would actually be a little higher and the eyeball would be a little more centered. In realistic eyes, most of the time, the iris not only hovers a bit under the upper eyelid, but also it frequently touches or almost touches the bottom lid as well. And if you are drawing animals, this is even more the case. In animals, you almost never even see the whites of their eyes unless the animal is like really freaked out. Now that we have a brief understanding of the eyeball, let's talk about a few eye shapes. Once you learn how to draw one eye shape, it can be easy to let yourself just draw that same shape over and over again. I know I fall into this trap a lot, but varying the shapes can help make your characters more unique. The round eye shape. This is a shape that I like to draw pretty frequently. When I draw eyes, I almost always start with the curve of the upper part of the eye. This gives me some direction on what type of shape I'm going for. Sometimes it can also be helpful to define how wide the eye is going to be ahead of time by marking the inner and outer corners of the eyes, and then you can just draw the arc between those points to make the top curve of the eye. Then, to get an idea of where the character is looking quickly, I will block in the whole iris. In my sketching phase, I like to simplify by not distinguishing between the pupil and the iris. I just use a solid brush to draw the circle-ish shape to figure out where the character is looking. Then, if I want to, I will erase the inside of the circle. Now on to drawing the bottom of the eye. Since this is a round eye shape, I want to keep in mind that the bottom curve will be kind of rounded as well. Now, if I'm going for a more stylized look, I could make these eyes even more round, maybe even like chibi-ish, but let's stick to a semi-realistic eye for this tutorial. It's not completely realistic, but just semi-realistic. I don't always draw the inner corner of the eyes, but for this tutorial, let's draw it. To help myself figure out the inner corner, I will lightly indicate the edge of the actual eyeball, and then from there, I draw the little triangle shape in the corner of the eye. The pupils go in the relative center of the iris when your character or your drawing is looking straight on like this. Looking at these eyes, I think the pupils could have technically been moved up a little bit, but oh well. I personally leave the pupils hollow because I like using different colors to color in the pupils in my art, even though technically the pupil is almost always black in real life, unless you have some sort of like red eye flash photography situation. Eyelid creases come in all manner of shapes, so this is something you can definitely play around with and see what matches your character, but for these eyes, let's just let the crease generally follow the same curve as the upper curve of the eye. Generally, I like to keep the crease line art at least a little bit thinner than the line art that indicates the upper part of the eye. Keeping the upper line of the eyes thicker hints that there are eyelashes there before I even draw actual eyelashes. Speaking of eyelashes, the way I like to draw eyelashes is more hinting at a few lashes here and there rather than drawing every single eyelash. For my style and most other styles, other than like maybe hyper realistic, drawing every single eyelash gets just too messy. I also frequently draw a kind of cat eye eyelash in the corner, the outer corner of the eye. It's a shape that I really like in artwork, especially for kind of a feminine character, and also it's a shape that I use in my own makeup a lot, so it's something I tend to incorporate. Something else you can add, but it isn't strictly necessary, is indicating the thickness of the eyelid. You can see I tried to draw a little bit of that thickness in, but from this angle and with just the line art, I didn't really think it was super necessary. I think it might be something that is more easily explored when you get into the coloring phase, or when the eyes are looking from like a different angle rather than straight on, but it is something you can play around with. Next shape, downturned eyes. For downturned eyes, the apex of the curve happens closer to the inner corner of the eye, and then it slopes gently down to the outer corners of the eyes. This eye shape is sometimes used and exaggerated a lot in innocent and sad, like anime characters. These eyes can have a cute sort of like puppy dog look. The steps I use to draw all of these eye shapes are basically the same, but changing the shape is about paying attention to where the apex of the curves happen in the upper and lower eyelids. Something else that you can do is also play around with adding a small indication of the under eye bag with a simple little line under the eye. The older the character, the more prominent this line might be, but even young characters can have a little under eye bag. It's not necessary, but it is a way to add a little bit more interest around the eyes. Oh, also, when you add eyebrows, you can easily express emotions other than the innocent puppy dog cuteness of this eye shape, and that goes for any of these eye shapes. When you start adding eyebrows and other facial features, you can start expressing whatever emotion you want. It isn't tied to like stereotypical, these eyes are used for sad characters, these eyes are used for like foxy characters. It's when you have multiple features in a face, the eye shape is not the only thing that indicates personality and emotion, but anyway, that's something I thought that would be good to mention. Now let's draw the opposite shape, the upturned eye. The apex of the curve happens closer to the outside of the eye rather than the inside of the eye. Whereas the downturned eye looks kind of like puppy dog eyes, the upturned eye has a little bit more of like a feline or cat-like look to them. For this eye shape, I kind of like making the outer part of the eyelid meet the eye before the edge of the eye. But this is just kind of a style thing. Like I said, eyelids can be totally different depending on the person and like the shape and how thick the eyelid is. So this is up to you, and you can play with how different eye shapes look with different types of eye creases. Speaking of eye crease shapes, there's also eyes with no eye crease. Monolids are typically a feature of some East Asian eyes, but they can also occur in other races as well, but it's a little bit less common. Something that could be good to keep in mind if you're drawing a character with monolids is sometimes the monolid can make the upper eyelid appear a little bit puffier. If you're looking at your character from a little bit of an angle, it might be a good thing to keep in mind that the monolid would extend out just a little bit more than the eyelid that has like a crease in it. And on to hooded eyes. At first glance, you might think that hooded eyes look pretty similar to downturned eyes, but the reason for the eye shape is a little bit different. For hooded eyes, the eyelid crease happens close to the inner part of the eye, and then the skin from the upper part of the crease covers the rest of the crease, giving that hooded look. To be fair, this drawing of hooded eyes might be a little bit exaggerated. In some people who have hooded eyes, you can see the actual crease a little bit more than what I'm showing here. But on the other hand, in the other direction, some hooded eyes can also be so hooded that you don't actually see the crease. And so they can almost appear like monolid eyes. And then for the last shape, almond eyes. I don't know if there's too much to say about almond eyes. Almonds, I mean, like their name suggests, the eye is generally shaped like an almond. And the curve, I feel like the curve for almond eyes is pretty even. It's generally in the center is the widest part of the eye. Okay, it's one thing to be able to draw eyes looking straight on, but let's try drawing some eyes from different angles.
Hey, what's up? If you've made it this far in the video, you are a very special person, and I'm wondering if you can hit the thumbs up button and maybe give me a little sub. Also, if you enjoy my artwork and the videos and tutorials, etc., you can pop on over to my Patreon to support my work and get lots of extra rewards and goodies. I really appreciate it. Okay, back to the video.
Let's start with one of my favorites, the 3/4-ish view. When I start drawing the eyes on the actual character's face, I actually like to start by at least roughly indicating the eyebrows. I do this because where the eyebrows are placed is kind of determined by where the structure of the brow is and the bridge of the nose. So the eyebrow helps me visualize that structure that frames the eye themselves. Once I have the eyebrow indicated, I'll start similarly to how I started with the eyes straight on. I start with the upper curve of the eye. Remember that the curve of the far eye is going to be more horizontally squished, but not necessarily vertically squished. Then I sketch in the irises to figure out where the character is looking. Let's have this character looking off away from the camera because I want to demonstrate what happens with the pupil location when the iris is not square with the camera. Let's sketch in the lower part of the eye, and then I'll show you how I place the pupil. Since the iris is a shallow bowl, when the iris is angled away from the camera, that means the bottom of the bowl, where the pupil is, will appear offset. The pupil won't be smack in the center of the iris. It will actually be set into the eye a little bit, closer to the screen right edge of the iris, since this character is looking off to the screen left. Have you ever wondered why crazy colored contacts look kind of weird? I mean, other than the color? Part of the reason is because they make it appear that the pupil is sitting on top of the eye lens and is not set back into the eye like it naturally should be. When it comes to both the iris and the pupil, thinking about the iris like a bowl really helps me out when it comes to figuring out the shape of the iris as it turns further and further away from the camera. You can use this sort of 3D reference to help visualize it. Imagine this bowl is the iris, and as it turns more and more away from us, the shape gets more and more oval, and the circle that's kind of at the bottom center of the bowl becomes more and more of an oval as well and appears more and more offset from the center. This is like how the pupil acts. And also shout out to Shvetov Kirill, I don't know if I said his name right, on sketchfab.com for this amazing ancient bowl reference. It's like the perfect depth for this demo. So shout out to this person. An easy trap to fall into is to accidentally make the far eye too small. I accidentally do this all the time. Like I said, horizontally, the far eye is going to appear narrower, but vertically, the eye should be about the same height as the close eye. It can be really helpful to do a quick measurement to make sure that your far eye matches your close eye. I do this all the time, and usually I have to scale up the far eye, and I just do that with a Control T, and I just pull it up vertically, make it a little bit bigger so that it matches the close eye. Okay, let's try a bit of a downward angle. This one might be a little bit trickier. As always, it can be helpful to have an underdrawing guideline that shows the curve around the head so that you know the eyes are in the correct curve / plane to match each other, even when the head is tilted. Also, the more the head is angled away, the more we might start seeing the roundness of the eyeball, especially on the edge of the far eye. Now, you have to be careful to not emphasize that eyeball bulging out of the eye too much. We don't want any eyes coming out of their sockets, but you will start to see a little bit more of that rounded shape a bit more as the eye is angled away. Also, at the lower angle, you may notice that the lower eyelid has a little more curve to it since we are looking down, and the upper eyelid could appear a little bit flatter in its curve. This would simply be due to the angle that the eyes are at. The more extreme your character is angled down, the more extreme the difference will be. In addition, with the head tilted down, the eyebrows may also appear closer to the top of the eyes, and the actual brow bone might even look like it overlaps a little bit with the eye. Remember, the eyes are set into a socket in the face, and the brow itself extends out a little bit from the face. So if the character's head is tilted down, especially at an extreme angle, that overlapping can happen. When the head is tilted up a little bit, the opposite can happen when it comes to the curve of the eyelids. The upper eyelids can appear more curved and the lower eyelids can appear a little more flat. Something I forgot to mention earlier was the spacing of the eyes. Generally, when the eyes are looking straight at you, there's approximately 1 eye width between the eyes. This can vary a little bit, but that's a good starting point. But sometimes when I'm drawing eyes at an angle, I will notice that I have accidentally sketched the eyes too close together or too far apart. Don't be afraid of moving an eye to fix this sort of mistake. If you are working digitally, you can easily use the lasso tool to select the eye and then just Control T for a free transform and nudge the eye a little bit in whatever direction you need. For this upward angle, I wanted to try playing around a little bit with the thickness of the eyelid again. So between the eyelash line and the eyeball itself, I erased a little white line to indicate the thickness of the actual eyelid. Again, I think that this will be more apparent once we add actual color, but from an angle like this, you may see more of that thickness of the upper lid since you are looking up at it. The same would go for the lower lid if your character is tilted down. Let's talk about drawing a profile eye. When drawing an eye in profile, be careful not to place the eye too forward on the face. Remember, the eye is inset in an eye socket. In profile, the eye should be approximately an eye width set into the head. You also have to be careful not to draw the eye too wide. Eyes can be pretty wide straight on, but they don't appear very wide in profile view. The way I like to think about the actual shape is to draw a slightly curved line in the front of the eye to indicate the front of the eyeball. Sometimes I let this front line reach all the way up, so it actually indicates the eyelid as well. Then I draw the top of the eye through that line, and I let it overhang in the front of the eyeball a little bit to show that there are eyelashes. The angle that this line makes can vary a bit depending on the eye shape and how wide the eyes are open. From here, I will draw the bottom of the eye to swoop up and meet the top line, creating the corner of the eye. The shape this all makes is almost a triangle. From here, I block in the iris and I start adding a few details like the eyelid and the underbag. For this drawing, I decided I wanted to open the eye a bit more, so I adjusted that top line. I also noticed that the eye looked a little big to me, and I did a quick measurement to see if the eye was set far back enough in the skull. While we are here, let's also see what a hooded eye shape might look like. Following basically the same process and measurement, I'm going to reduce the opacity of the other eye, and we're just going to trace right on top. But we're going to change the angle of the upper eyelid. What about closed eyes? We follow basically the same shape that makes the front of the eyeball, but we draw the line that indicates where the eye is closed, mostly down to the bottom of the eye, but not 100% down to the bottom of the eye. Remember, when you close your eyes or you blink, your lower eyelid comes up slightly to meet your upper eyelid. It may also be worth thinking about a little bit of the eyelid thickness when the eye is closed. So the eyeball rests an eye width back from the front of the face, but with the eye closed, it might be a teensy bit closer to the front because of like the flesh of the actual eyelid. This is a super minute detail that probably no one will care about or notice, but hey, now you know. While we are on the subject of closed eyes, let's do a little demo from a 3/4 view. If you struggle a bit with visualizing the closed eyes, what you can do is roughly sketch in a sort of open eye shape and then draw in the crease where the eye is closed before erasing those open eye guidelines that you sketched. I think one thing you have to be careful of is to not lose the roundness of the eye just because the eyes are closed. Remember that that far eye is still curving away from the camera. There is a round eyeball under the eyelid that shapes that lash line, so it curves. And remember, because the eyes are closed, the eyelashes are now angled down so they rest more against the cheek rather than up against the eyelid. And that is part 1 of the eye tutorial. I'm going to let a few more eye demos play for you if you want to observe me sketching a few more eyes with music, and keep an eye out a little later for part 2 of the tutorial where we will tackle coloring and painting eyes. So that means your assignment is to draw a bunch of sets of eyes so that you will have eye sketches or line art ready to color for the next tutorial. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It's really thanks to you that I can make tutorials like this, and your support means the world to me. Thank you so much for believing in what I do. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you, and I will see you next time. Bye!